Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Air Florida Flight 90. My name is Alex Napper. This is Crew Resource Management, FLT 447, and today we will be investigating the case study from the accident at Washington National Airport in Arlington, Virginia, located 3 miles south of Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. November 62 Alpha Foxtrot is a Boeing 737-200 series aircraft that was preparing for a flight to Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport with a layover at the intermediate airport, Tampa International. According to the History.com website document titled Plane Crashes in the Potomac River, the aircraft had flew into Washington National Airport from Miami in the early afternoon of that same day. The aircraft was supposed to have a short stop at Washington National Airport. However, there were adverse weather conditions which had caused the airport to close for an hour and 15 minutes. 34-year-old Captain Larry Wheaton commanded the flight. The flight simulation video titled FS 2004 Disaster in the Potomac, Air Florida Flight 90, uploaded by Alec Joshua Ibe, revealed the flight history of the captain as well as the first officer. In the simulation, the video stated that Captain Wheaton had approximately 8,300 total flight hours with 2,322 hours of commercial jet experience. Captain Wheaton had logged a total of 1,752 hours on the 737 aircraft, and 1,100 of the hours were served as a captain. The right seat of the aircraft consisted of 31-year-old First Officer Roger Pettit. First Officer Pettit has earned approximately 3,353 total flight hours, with 992 of the hours accumulated at Air Florida. Officer Pettit was a former U.S. Air Force pilot with 669 flight hours. As a flight examiner, he was an instructor pilot and a ground instructor in an operational F-15 unit. The video titled Air Crash Investigation, Air Florida Flight 90, Boeing 737 Ice River Plane Crash, published by Air Crash Investigation, stated that both pilots had less than 3 years of experience flying the 737. It is also important to note that the pilots were more comfortable and familiar with the mild weather conditions in Florida rather than adjusting to the conditions at Washington National Airport. There were a total of 79 passengers on Flight 90, including the 5 crew members, for the 2-hour flight. It was January 13th, 1982. Washington National Airport consisted of conditions that were far from routine, with consistent fall of precipitation. The atmospheric conditions presented one of the worst snowstorms for the airport during that year. According to the website document titled In 1982, Air Florida Flight 90 Crashes into the Potomac River After Takeoff by AirNav Systems, Air Florida was scheduled to depart the airport at 2:15, but the airport had struggled to stay open during the snowstorm due to the constant snowfall and low temperatures of -4 degrees Celsius, which is 24.8 degrees Fahrenheit. In the afternoon at 1:30, all flight operations were delayed, and the aircraft were being grounded on the ramp area. Air Florida Flight 90 was located specifically at Gate 12. Snow vehicles were removing the snow from the runways. The adverse weather conditions caused an official closing of the airport for an hour and 15 minutes, specifically from 1:38 to 2:53. At 2 p.m., Flight 90 began to allow passengers to board the aircraft. Moderate to heavy snowfall accumulated during the afternoon, reaching a total of 8 inches. The snowfall was heavy enough to accumulate at a fast pace on the body of the aircraft, which ultimately contributed to the crash into the 14th Street Bridge. The aircraft started its de-icing procedure at 2:20 p.m., with the captain calling the de-icing crew for their services. During the winter months, temperatures can decrease to at or below freezing levels, which causes contaminants to accumulate on the aircraft. Contaminants consist of snow, frost, ice, and slush, which are hazardous to the smooth airflow over the wings and decreasing lift. A routine procedure requires de-icing crews to remove the contaminants from the aircraft critical surfaces before flight. According to the website document titled, "In 1982, Air Florida Flight 90 crashes into the Potomac River after takeoff by Air Nav Systems," the captain decided to terminate the de-icing procedures after receiving information that the airport would not be opening at a scheduled time of 2:30 p.m. At 2:45 p.m., the captain requested the de-icing crew to return to clean the aircraft before taxiing towards the active runway. Flight 90 is delayed for another hour after the completion of the de-icing process. Throughout the delay for takeoff, there were a sequence of events that occurred during the duration of time from the ramp area to the active runway. The airport officially opens shortly after 3 p.m. At 3:23 p.m., the aircraft receives pushback clearance from Gate 12. There was a buildup of ice which prevented the pushback vehicle from leaving the ramp area. When the pushback vehicle was unable to receive traction on the ice, the captain made the decision to use reverse thrust in an attempt to help melt the ice on the ramp area. According to the flight simulation video FS 2004, Disaster in the Potomac, Air Florida Flight 90, by Alec Joshua Ebe, the captain used the reverse thrust for approximately 30 to 90 seconds. A tug with properly equipped snow chains was eventually used to move the plane from the gate. At 3:35 p.m., the aircraft begins to taxi towards runway 36, while snow accumulated and continued to fall throughout the afternoon. The captain and the first officer noticed snow on their wings while taxiing behind a New York Air DC-9 aircraft. The FS 2004 Disaster in the Potomac, Air Florida Flight 90 video by Alec Joshua Ebe reveals that First Officer Pettit was concerned about the accumulation of contaminants on the wing, while Air Florida was waiting in line on the taxiway for the runway. Captain Wheaton decided to maneuver the aircraft behind the engines of a DC-9 aircraft in front of them. The purpose of the maneuver was to use the exhaust gases from the engines to melt the contaminants on the wings. Captain Wheaton states that he has some snow on his wing. However, First Officer Roger Pettit informs the captain that there's about a quarter to a half an inch on his side of the wing. The crew had the option to return to the ramp area for further de-icing procedures, but the crew did not want to enter further delays. There was a long line of aircraft waiting to take off. When the captain and the first officer review their pre-takeoff checklist, the captain states that the engine anti-ice system is off when questioned about it from the first officer. The aircraft is given the instruction from air traffic control to line up and wait on runway 36. November 62 Alpha Foxtrot, runway 36, cleared for takeoff. Air Florida Flight 90 is finally given the clearance for takeoff from the runway at 3:59 p.m. First Officer Roger Pettit notices the abnormal instrument readings from the engine pressure ratio gauges shortly after the takeoff roll. The thrust readings quickly rise past target levels for a sufficient takeoff, and First Officer Roger Pettit notices the inaccuracy in the readings from the EPR dial, with a false indication that the engines are providing more power than usual for takeoff. The aircraft is also having trouble reaching the normal takeoff speed of 144 knots when rolling down the runway. First Officer Roger Pettit reduces the throttle power and informs the captain to look at the flight deck instruments. The captain responds by saying, "Yes, it is. There's 80," which was referring to the airspeed indicator. A passenger from the flight named Joe Stiley was interviewed about his experience from the accident, along with stating that the airport received consistent snowfall. His words from the video titled "Air Crash Investigation, Air Florida Flight 90, Boeing 737 Ice River Plane Crash" were, "We were nowhere near the normal speeds that I was used to feeling in a 737. Going down that runway was similar to riding in a road full of potholes." First Officer Pettit does not believe that the instruments were displaying an accurate reading, but does not challenge Captain Wheaton. The nose of the aircraft entered a sharp pitching attitude shortly after takeoff, which resulted in an increase in drag and loss of speed. The aircraft also entered a stall. The sharp pitching attitude caused the stall. A stall decreases an aircraft's lifting capability and causes it to lose altitude. Flight 90 began to fall from an altitude of 352 feet and collides with the 14th Street Bridge before falling into the icy water of the Potomac River. The 14th Street Bridge is located less than a mile from the airport. According to the flight simulator video by Alec Joshua Ebe, there were 4 fatalities on the bridge, along with 4 drivers who were injured due to the impact from the aircraft. The United States Park Police Helicopter Unit received a call from Air Traffic Control Tower at 4:06 p.m. about the need for assistance at the site of the crash. The police unit is located 1.6 miles away from the scene of the crash, and the group responded to the phone call with a helicopter arriving at the scene. There were 5 survivors from the total of 79 who boarded the aircraft. At 4:35, the rescue mission was completed, and aircraft investigators reached the location of the disaster during the evening. There were 6 passengers on board who initially survived the crash. However, passenger Arlen D. Williams, Jr. died while allowing other passengers to be rescued first with the life ring. The 14th Street Bridge was renamed the Arlen D. Williams, Jr. Memorial Bridge. We can evaluate many contributing factors that have caused a breakdown in efficient crew resource management skills, as well as contributing factors to the crash of Air Florida. The NTSB report from the National Transportation Safety Board website communicated that the major causes of the aircraft were the harsh winter weather conditions and pilot error. The errors commence with the poor de-icing operation. Aircraft require a smooth flow of air around the wings in order to take maximum advantage of the upward force of lift. Contaminants on the surface of the aircraft created a disruption in the lifting capability. During the de-icing process, the de-icers did not record the proper outside air temperature of -4 degrees Celsius. They thought it was -2 degrees Celsius. As a result, there was an inadequate amount of de-icing fluid sprayed onto the aircraft. The fluid also did not have the proper amount of glycol-water mixture suitable for the operation. There was less than the required amount of glycol fluid in the glycol-water mixture. The low amount of glycol fluid agent signifies that the de-icing fluid was weaker than the indication from the de-icing operator's control panel. The issue derives from a calibrated valve in the delivery hose. The NTSB discovered that the calibrated valve was replaced with an unmodified valve. The unmodified valve caused a reduced flow of glycol to the nozzle. The reduced flow of glycol in the mixture resulted in the entire aircraft receiving a weak de-icing fluid operation. And throughout my experience of working as a de-icer in the past, the pad commanders would be responsible for providing the outside air temperature and lowest operational use temperature with the use of a refractometer before de-icing operations. The refractometers are used for measuring the concentration and or freezing point of the glycol-based fluids for de-icing and anti-icing aircraft. As a de-icer, I am responsible for inspecting the aircraft to ensure that the surfaces are clean and clear from all contaminants. Once the job is finished with each aircraft, it is the pilot in command's decision to request for further de-icing services. I believe that the captain made the mistake of using reverse thrust after the pushback from gate 12 at the airport. The reverse thrust is normally used during the landing phase of flight as an adequate braking system. The hot air usually leaves the back of the engine, but with reverse thrust, the hot air is redirected towards the front of the aircraft. It is important to note that the hot air can move any buildup of contaminations towards the front of the wing and into the engine inlet. Low temperatures cause the contaminants to freeze and cause difficulties with flight. The captain made a poor judgment decision and did not consider the movement of contaminants that could easily freeze on the aircraft. The use of reverse thrust is further evidence that contaminants contributed to the cause of the crash, with frozen contaminants blocking the engine's EPR sensors. EPR stands for engine pressure ratio. The use of thrust reversers was an attempt to assist the pushback vehicle in leaving the ramp area because of the lack of traction on the ground due to the ice. The 737 was de-iced before takeoff. However, a significant amount of time passed between the de-icing process and the time for takeoff, which allowed more snow to build up on the surface. Flight crews consist of flight attendants and pilots, which signify that every member of the team is responsible for ensuring the safety of the mission. Briefings before and after the flight allow the captain to establish his voice and position of authority, along with an establishment of each member's role and responsibility in the operation. Flight attendants as well as pilots should communicate between each other on the hazard of taking off with contaminants adhered to the surface of the airplane. The safety of the traveling public should never be sacrificed for the mission. The entire crew had narrow focus on the mission of flying to Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. First Officer Pettit was the only professional from the 5-crew team who expressed concern for the flight. His words were, "This is bad. Probably the worst snowstorm I have ever seen." His words were presented on the flight simulator video titled FS 2004 Disaster in the Potomac, Air Florida Flight 90, and in the video by Air Crash Investigation titled Air Crash Investigation, Air Florida, Boeing 737 Ice River Plane Crash. Throughout both videos, First Officer Roger Pettit communicates the concern for the accumulation of snow and ice. While waiting in line on the taxiway, First Officer Roger Pettit states that it has been a while since the start of the de-icing procedure. The captain maneuvers the aircraft behind the New York Air DC-9's engines in order to melt the ice on the wings. The contaminants refroze on the back of the wing due to the low temperatures. The plane was waiting in a long line of aircraft for takeoff, and the crew decided not to return for de-icing services. The crew should have been aware of the holdover time. Holdover time is considered a duration of time that begins when the final application of de-icing and anti-icing fluid commences and is ineffective when the fluid passes a certain time limit. There is also a Federal Aviation regulation about operations in icing conditions, which is a response from the Federal Aviation Administration about hazards of contaminants adhering to the surface of the aircraft. According to the Cornell Law School website about legal information, the Federal Aviation Regulation 121.629 is a regulation that contains rules about operations in icing conditions. The information in the regulation contains the clearest indications about the importance of the safety of flight. Part A states that no person may dispatch or release an aircraft, continue to operate an aircraft en route, or land an aircraft when in the opinion of the pilot in command or aircraft dispatcher, icing conditions are expected or met that might adversely affect the safety of the flight. Part B states that no person may take off an aircraft when frost, ice, or snow is adhering to the wings, control surfaces, propellers, engine inlets, or other critical surfaces of the aircraft, or when the takeoff would not be in compliance with paragraph C. Takeoffs with frost underneath the wing in the area of the fuel tanks may be authorized by the administrator. Pilots and de-icing crew members must be familiar with and adhere to relevant Federal Aviation regulations regarding weather conditions in order to avoid another occurrence of Air Florida Flight 90. Along with poor judgment of using the reverse thrust on the ramp area, there were more contributing factors along the way. First Officer Roger Pettit communicated that he had a quarter to a half an inch of snow on the wings. However, the flight crew did not return to the ramp area due to the increase in delays. When Air Florida Flight 90 was second in line for the active runway, the pilots reviewed their pre-takeoff checklist. The captain states that the engine anti-ice system is in the off position when questioned about it by First Officer Pettit. The pilots did not realize the risk of having the engine anti-ice system in the off position. Contaminants on the engine inlet and outlet froze due to the reverse thrust, low temperatures, and absence of the anti-ice system. The flight simulation video, FS 2004 Disaster in the Potomac, Air Florida Flight 90 video, revealed that investigators believe that the flight crew did not turn on the anti-ice system due to the Florida-based pilots normally flying in warmer weather temperatures. The absence in the use of the anti-ice system causes problems for the engine inlet and outlet sensors. The sensors produce thrust readings by measuring the ratio of air pressure at the front and the back of the engine. Due to the fact that contaminants such as slush or snow froze on the engine, the EPR displayed an inaccurate reading of 2.04. However, the engine was actually operating at a weaker thrust level of 1.7. Essentially, the instruments were indicating that the engines were providing more power than the actual thrust level. The aircraft departed from runway 36 without sufficient power for takeoff. The aircraft also contained contaminants on the body of the aircraft, which changed the camber of the wing. Camber is known as the curvature of the wing. The contaminants created an increase in drag and decrease in lift. along with the low power and contaminants causing an increase in the takeoff roll. There was specifically a 15-second increase in the takeoff roll. The first officer observed the EPR dial in relation to exhaust heat and fuel flow indications. He reduced the throttle, but the captain stated in regards to the airspeed indicator that it's reaching 80 knots. The first officer was not assertive in his concerns about the abnormal instrument readings and simply replied with, "No, I don't think that is right." "Ah, maybe it is." The EPR dial was displaying a higher than normal thrust level, while the exhaust heat and fuel flow displayed indications of a lower thrust level. Once the aircraft became airborne, it only reached 352 feet, which reveals that the 737 did not gain the proper speed and altitude for a safe takeoff. The decision to abort the takeoff when analyzing abnormal instrument readings would have saved the lives of all passengers. The analysis of the Air Florida Flight 90 case study also includes a professional interview. I've interviewed a pilot within the regional airlines. He has provided me with more insight on crew resource management concepts and feedback on the breakdown in performance from the crew as an efficient team. The interview started with a question on the first indications of a hazard within the pilot's actions. His words were, "I would immediately suggest a breakdown in CRM began when the boarding process was still going on." The aircraft was behind schedule due to the airport closure, which could have caused the crew to begin to feel rushed. The aircraft also exceeded its holdover time with such heavy snowfall. At the point the crew completed the checklist and state anti-ice off, I feel a complete breakdown in communication has occurred. The cockpit voice recorded notes from the first officer stating, "It's been a while since we de-iced." Yet he never exercised his authority as a crew member. Now, the professional pilot who I was interviewing included a better statement than First Officer Roger Pettit's concern for the safety of the flight. He stated, "A better option would have been a more direct statement of information and leadership in direction for the flight, such as, 'It's been a while since we de-iced. I'm calling operations to have them de-ice us again.'" I agree with the pilot's new statement and the ability to apply the assertiveness model. The pilot's statement expresses a concern for the performance in the takeoff roll. The statement takes into consideration the hazard of contaminants on the surface of the aircraft and expresses a proactive statement regarding the ability to mitigate risks by taking over the situation and taxiing back to the ramp area. The interview included CRM model concepts within the questions. When asking which CRM concept applies to the Air Florida accident, he analyzed the Shell model, as well as the Swiss cheese model by James Reason. According to Skybrary web document titled ICAO Shell Model, the Shell model is a concept that was developed by Elwyn Edwards in 1972 as an understanding of human factors. The Module 1 presentation Part 1 titled Crew Resource Management, a Description, History, and Relationship to Regulatory and Voluntary Programs explains on page 32 that human factors is the applied science of people working together with devices. Human factors is a critical component of the Shell model, and it has relevance towards crew resource management training due to the exercise of interpersonal skills, internal resources, and crew performance. The Shell model is also outlined on page 32 of Module 1, stating that Software refers to documents governing the operations. Hardware is the physical resources available. The environment refers to the external context in which the system operates, and liveware consists of human operators composing the crew. The pilot who I was interviewing states, in regards to software, all of the rules and standard procedures varying from FAA rules to the company policies in regards to cold weather operations were either broken or skewed by the crew involved. His supporting statement was that holdover times were definitely disregarded, standard procedures such as anti-ice configurations were disregarded, as well as crew management, and more importantly, threat error management. The pilot explained hardware, saying the relationship between the crew and the equipment involved clearly caused an issue. From the cockpit, the pilots were reviewing their pre-takeoff checklist and did not use engine anti-ice system. The engine anti-ice system ensures that the engines would provide proper thrust levels for a safe takeoff. During the time of the takeoff rule, the pilots did not respond to the inaccurate instrument readings from the engine pressure ratio dial. Now, in regards to the environment consists of external context in which the system operates. The pilot states that in the accident, the largest factor that contributes to the accident were the weather conditions for that particular day and the way the crew interacted with it. The crew was inexperienced with winter weather operations and failed to acknowledge the negative effect that the heavy snow contamination would have on the overall performance of the aircraft. Liveware consists of the human operators composing of the crew. In the pilot's response, he states, the communication between the crew was a poor performance. Neither the captain nor the first officer exhibited good leadership skills. The cockpit crew seemed to have a permissive and passive personality that allowed each of them to make bad decisions and increase risks. The crew members were not in control of the current contaminated state of the aircraft, and neither of the pilots called for a rejection in the takeoff. The pilot transitioned towards the Swiss cheese model in order to state the flaws within the operation. According to the Swiss cheese model, from page 26 of Cultural and Team Factors in CRM, Module 2 presentation, when accidents occur, there are breakdowns in the interactions among components involved in the process. The breakdowns within operations cause operational hazards and catastrophic failure for the entire crew. The pilot stated, the accident could have been avoided if it was not for the fact that every single error made was never captured by the crew. The errors create a chain of events, or holes, in the Swiss cheese, which ultimately contribute to the undesirable outcome of the mission. The Air Florida flight was an unproductive process that resulted in the loss of lives due to poor crew resource management skills, unsafe supervision of the conditions outside and inside the aircraft, along with unsafe acts of taking off without sufficient speed or altitude for recovery from the stall. The interview with the professional pilot consisted of improvements as well in order for the flight crew to adapt to adverse conditions. The pilot responded with, the best thing for the crew to do during adverse conditions is to slow down, take a moment to address the situation, and recall training. He compared standard operating procedures of a flight crew to the procedures of a scripted scene in a movie, in which everyone involved knows exactly who is going to act and what is going to happen. The pilot also stated that he was flying with a captain who is a former Air Force fighter pilot. They were cleared for an approach while being vectored to the final approach course. The pilot knew that the person who is flying would arm the approach mode by using the flight control panel. In that instance, there was no verification of the selection of the annunciator panel, and no one armed the approach. Thanks to standard operating procedures, the pilot who I was interviewing immediately noticed the error and questioned the captain. Good crew resource management and threat error management relies on all crew members for participation, and everyone is vulnerable towards making mistakes. Therefore, when non-standard practices emerge, the safety of the flight would ultimately be reduced. Now, if the pilot who I was interviewing had said nothing, then the crew could have ultimately flown through the course and caused a traffic advisory or resolution advisory. In addition to speaking about contributing factors towards the accident and crew resource management concepts, I had asked him about effective crew resource management practices that he has learned in his work environment. He responded by saying, "I have learned that no matter how much experience or training you have, anyone can make a mistake. I have learned to challenge any scenario that does not seem right in my eyes and open the floor for discussion. I have also learned to ask questions about actions from my fellow pilots. It is important to give them an opportunity to speak and provide a healthy, non-punitive environment." We had ended our discussion with FAA voluntary programs with a focus on the most beneficial program for Air Florida flight crew. According to the Module 1 presentation, Part 2, page 23 lists a group of voluntary reporting programs and voluntary auditing programs. The pilot who I was interviewing responded by saying the most effective program that could have alleviated the Air Florida accident would have been the Line Operation Safety Audit Program. I believe that other programs are geared more towards reactiveness rather than proactiveness. Although the remaining programs can be used to identify common weaknesses and errors among the flight crew, I believe the Line Operational Safety Audit Program would have been the most effective in capturing any disregard to standard operating procedures. The analysis of the case study, along with the interview with the professional pilot within the industry, had provided me with a practical understanding and perspective on the value of crew resource management concepts. According to Module 1 presentation, Part 1 on Crew Resource Management, a description, history, and relationship to regulatory and voluntary programs, crew resource management training prepares crew members to properly utilize resources in order to assess the situation. Crew resource management is only effective if it includes all members of the aviation community who are involved with the flight. The best way to maximize mission effectiveness and safety with available resources is through the steps outlined in the assertive model. The leadership, followership, and communication in CRM finds the 5 steps of the assertive model on page 23. If information that the first officer revealed towards the captain were linked to the concern for the mission, proper precautions would have been performed instead of exhibiting a hazardous attitude known as resignation. The first officer exhibited signs of resignation in 2 occurrences. The History.com website document titled "Plane Crash into Potomac" revealed the first officer's comment about de-icing operations, in which he said, "It is a losing battle trying to de-ice these things. It gives you a false sense of security. That's all it does." First Officer Roger Pettit exhibited an attitude of resignation towards the inaccurate instrument readings as well. He alerted the captain about his confusion with the abnormally high thrust level that was depicted on the engine instruments. The captain did not identify an issue with the takeoff and did not reject the mission. The first officer stated, "No, I don't think that's right. Ah, maybe it is." The first officer would have saved the lives of many passengers if he believed in his knowledge and challenged the captain's passive actions with the takeoff. The antidote for resignation is on page 15 of the Leadership, Followership, and Communications in Crew Resource Management presentation document. The antidote is, I am not helpless. I can make a difference. Always assume that time is available. The first officer expressed a helpless and doubtful behavior when communicating towards the captain. Now, according to the Cornell Law School website on 14 CFR Part 91.3, Part A states that the pilot in command is directly responsible for and has the final authority to the operation of that aircraft. The captain and first officer have the responsibility towards the operation and safety of the flight. If the captain is not able to handle new information provided by the first officer should use the assertive model and take over the situation. The crew did not propose an alternative solution when viewing the instrument readings and analyzing snow on the wings. As a result, there was an absence in achieving agreement on a change in the course of action. Captains are the main leaders on the flight deck. However, followers have the responsibility to advocate their points of view through inquiry or questioning under the effective assertion model. The flight crew consisted of Florida-based pilots who would normally fly in warmer weather. As a result, the crew did not notice the mistake of leaving the engine anti-ice system in the off position. An increase in flight hours with simulator practice in adverse conditions could also provide the pilots with higher performance levels when flying in particular circumstances. All pilots should be aware that weather conditions play a significant role in the decisions during flight operations. I strongly support and encourage FAA voluntary programs because they are used to improve the crew resource management skills within pilots and promote excellent habits regards to aeronautical decision making for the entire crew. The programs identify trends within the workplace, proactively mitigate errors, and improve the safety of operations. I believe that line operation safety audits would be the most effective, and it can address aviation safety in a proactive manner in which trained observers are present during the flight crew training, and they evaluate several aspects of crew performance. Threat and error management is a component within the 6th generation of the evolution of crew resource management training. Threat and error management is included within line operation safety audits in order for in-flight observers to record how flight crews manage the situations to maintain safety. The in-flight observers collect the data about crew resource management performance and interview the pilots about their decision-making skills. The interview also includes suggestions on improvements in order to perform at a better level as a team. Line Operation Safety Audit is an effective FAA program that is able to prevent any catalyst of major accidents. It adopts preventative actions, and we can also learn valuable lessons from transportation accidents. November 6-2 Alpha Foxtrot was a normal flight operation in hazardous winter conditions. On January 13th, snowstorm was heavy enough to accumulate at a quick pace on the wings of the aircraft, ultimately contributing to the crash into the 14th Street Bridge and entering the icy water of the Potomac River. We should always keep in mind the performance of an effective crew and keep in mind that we are all susceptible to hazardous attitudes, and mistakes. As aviation professionals, it is imperative to always plan accordingly for a flight by adapting to new situations when needed and be able to identify, describe, and correct improper crew resource management behavior. The safety and outcome of a flight depends on assuring effective crew decision making, especially under threatening conditions. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.